Welcome to Getting Defensive Weekend Primer presented by Gridiron Ratings. I'm your host, JJ Wenner, and tonight we're going to take a look at the Week 13 matchups and all the news you need. Now, Gary is away on assignment this week, but with me is our returning champ. You can find him on Twitter at Dynasty Tripp. Tripp Rebner, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. It's after Thanksgiving. We're in the home stretch. There's lots of football to watch. It might not be that good based on tonight's game, but it's entertaining nonetheless.
Man, I can't believe we're at the playoffs for fantasy football, right? Well, this week, next week, and then it starts.
That's right. That's right.
This season has flown by for me. I don't know about you, Tripp.
It's been an interesting season. All kinds of crazy things have happened, and it's the 17-game season. It's almost like it's hard to even calibrate like where you are in the season because it doesn't divide by 4 anymore. More quarter poles.
I am a fan of things that are easily divisible. Well, we might as well just get right to it. Let's start off with the 1 p.m. games. Arizona is visiting Chicago. Now, I think I have been misled, Tripp, and you can correct me on this. I had always assumed that dual threat quarterbacks are a curse to opposing defensive ends, right? Because their ability to elude the rush. But Arizona, Philly, and Baltimore are all in the top 5 of most points allowed to a defensive end over the past 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So should we, being that Chicago is playing Arizona, be firing up all of our Bear defensive ends?
I wouldn't. When I look at starting defensive ends, I'm really focused on sacks. I'm not eager to bet on tackle totals because I just don't feel like they give you the ceiling you want. And so what I've been looking at with Kyla Murray is that he's just not taking a lot of sacks this year. And so I was looking at the total sacks taken, and they ticked up when Colt McCoy was in there because he's not as mobile. So for me, I'm not eager to get the edges for Chicago out there. I think that certainly the Bears will be playing uphill most of the game against the Cardinals, assuming they're coming out well rested with their quarterback and possibly Nuke Hopkins back as well. I would not be tempted to start Robert Quinn or Travis Gibson based on the opportunity. I think limited opportunities and Murray's ability to elude the pass rush. That's a man I would sit personally.
Now, do you think Roquan plays this week? He's had 2 straight DNPs.
Yeah, at this point, even if he plays, he's probably limited to the point where you're not eager to play him. I mean, I don't see how you sit a guy like Roquan. He's just the number 1 overall IDP, I think, in terms of points allowed or points scored, and you can't sit him if he goes. But boy, you're not eager to put him out there. There's some upside in the fact that he's going to have James Conner stare him in the face, and James Conner can't elude much of anybody, so they're going to have some collisions. You might knock Roquan off the game at the rate Roquan's going.
Man, it's not pretty. I'm starting him in the league we're in, the FPLC together, and I'm a little bit nervous.
Yeah,
I'm a bit nervous. All right, anybody else in that matchup you want to talk about?
Well, let's see, Arizona, Chicago. One thing that's interesting to me is that Artie Burns has taken over, it looked like, in the last game as the starting cornerback. They had been playing a youngster out there named Kendall Vildor, who's been utterly useless for IDP. It's just amazingly so, especially with the whole idea of the rookie target rule that didn't really happen for him anyway. And so Artie Burns has seemed to have supplanted him in the starting role. And Artie Burns was a first-round pick 5 years ago and totally washed out. And I would be willing to bet that he would see a fair share of targets against him in this coming week. And I wouldn't mind trotting him out there if I felt like I needed a corner. So there's several interesting corners this week, and he's one that is undoubtedly free that no one's paying any attention to, that can be picked up an hour before the game if necessary and plugged into a lineup and probably get you half a dozen tackles.
Now, Tripp, later on in this show, I am going to give you a couple trivia questions. One of my trivia questions was going to be about rookie corners. And that corner you just named, who I don't even know their name. What was that? Vilmer?
Kendall Vildor.
Yeah, Vildor. He's 5th in rookie snaps at the cornerback position this year.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, started from week 1 and played the whole year basically. Sounds like a Harry Potter character, but he's out there.
He definitely does. All right, let's go to the next matchup. Houston, Texas are hosting the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Christian Kirksey is designated to return. Are we giving him once he's active, like a week to reacclimate, or is he the second he's ready, we're throwing him in the lineup type of guy?
Well, the question is not if he's designated. We kind of figured he'd be designated. The question is he activated, right? Because if he, even if he's IR boomerang, if he's still IR, then he's inactive. But if he is activated before this game, and it could be the day before, let's see. Well, I take it back. Are they traveling? No, they're at home, so it could just be very short notice where he's activated. But if he is, I think he's a slightly risky start. But I think he's a pretty good start, certainly against Jonathan Taylor and the Colts. And so I wouldn't mind putting him out there at all if he's activated, because the last time we saw him out there, he was playing full time. He was calling plays, and he was out there alongside Kamu Grugier-Hill. Who knows if I said that right? But
you did,
like on paper. and a certain Zach Cunningham, who everybody loves, it will be at risk of going to the bench in a part-time role if Kirksey comes back. So, yeah, if you're looking for a third linebacker, or if you've been stashing Kirksey on IR the whole time, then if he's back, then yeah, he's in there.
That's awesome, because I have been stashing him, and I will put him back in there. Anybody else that you are looking to start in this game?
I'm worried about game flow in this one. I just at the risk of being too confident in how this one's going to turn out, even though it's at Houston, I would not be eager to start Jonathan Greenert, who's been quite the revelation this year as a pass rusher, but he's coming in banged up. He's questionable right now for the game. And then there's Kwity Paye, who's the more highly touted player, the rookie out of Michigan, who's coming on lately. And he and Al-Qadim Muhammad has seemed to have wrested the starting roles and playing a significant amount of snaps. And Kwity Paye has 18 pressures over his last 4 games. And the Texans' offense is in a bit of disarray, like the defense. So therefore, I think he's probably a pretty attractive upside play.
So, all right, let's jump over then to the Chargers are going to see the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Bengals are on a 2-game win streak, and they have made it clear that they want to run the ball more. Now, does this affect who we start on the opposite side for the Chargers?
Well, I think the interesting part about running the ball more is it's not just the run the ball to Mixon, but they're throwing it to him too. And so that gives lots of opportunities for the linebackers to have to make plays, because they're trying to stop Mixon. He had 30 carries one week recently. So that makes him both of those guys, Drew Tranquil and Kyzir White, pretty attractive plays. What people may not know is that Kenneth Murray just seems to have completely faded for relevance. He played like 13% of the snaps last week, and Tranquil and Kyzir White played like over 80% each. Makes both of them pretty interesting plays against Joe Mixon in a game where you expect to have a little higher pace and some opportunities. The other guy I got is kind of a deeper reach in a true position league is Uchenna Nwosu, who's come on in the last few weeks. He's a guy that is a young player. Seems to be finally emerging. He has 8 pressures in 3 games, and I think he's in a contract year, so he's got about 4 more games to prove that he should stick in the NFL and get a contract somewhere. So, but he has actually been doing it after obviously a very slow start to his career. So, but the Bengals are not immune to giving up sacks. Their line is not the best in the world, and so he's a guy that I wouldn't mind putting out there either.
What about for Cincinnati? Anybody you're firing up?
Probably not. I thought about whether or not I would want to put a cornerback in there, because oftentimes I look for in my cornerback matchup considerations anybody who's covering Keenan Allen. And so I contemplated Mike Hilton. And so that's probably not the worst start in the world. The guy that I'm more concerned about in Cincinnati's defense is Jesse Bates. And it's probably not a revelation to anybody who has him rostered these days, but he's the number 54th scoring defensive back in the entire NFL this year, which is an enormous fall from grace for a player that IDP gamers have come to rely on in recent years. But I think there's a couple of good and important reasons for that. One is that the Bengals were so bad for so long that they couldn't get off the field, and Jesse Bates is always racking up tackles and snaps, most importantly. He was among the league leaders in snaps year in and year out. This year, they're in the middle of the pack on snaps because their defense is playing better, and the offense too, obviously. And the second thing about that is because they're winning games, they're playing downhill. And playing downhill, Jake Bates, the free safety, has to play deep in order to defend against the big play. And so I think his responsibility and his workload has changed a little bit in ways that's made him play or function as an IDP more like a normal free safety and not like the volume player that he'd been for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that position that he's now playing is not great for fantasy relevance, unfortunately. Jumping over to Minnesota visiting Detroit. Now, I believe I am contractually obligated to mention every game. So, Vikings at the Lions. Who do we got in this game? Are you starting anybody?
No, it looks kind of a mess. Eric Kendricks is even banged up, and who knows? The Lions may not even be able to possess the football well enough to get anything done. You got the pass rush is kind of a mess. Daniil Hunter's out for the year. Everson Griffin is just out. So that's a whole different story. So and then you got Lions pass rushers, and for a while there, I remember we talked a few weeks ago about should we be chasing Lions pass rushers, and it's like, please, people, don't. Just don't. I would love it if Trey Flowers ever be relevant again. It seemed like he was a good player for a while there, but he can't stay healthy on the field. And the other guys that they throw out there just warm bodies, whether it's Charles Harris or Austin Bryant, is like, this is just a game that I just don't see much to get excited about. The only possibility would be Alex Anzalone, a linebacker, because you would expect a downhill game flow for the Vikings, meaning opportunities to make tackles. But Anzalone has been one of the least efficient linebackers in the NFL this year. So I got him in some deep leagues where I'm playing him, but it's not an exciting exciting start recommendation.
Yeah, I have Anzalone in a deep league where I start him every week, but it's only because he gets the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. He's a full-time player. It's hard to ignore.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Next up, the Giants are visiting the Dolphins. Now, Logan Ryan is coming off the COVID list. Is he a must start against the Dolphins and their resurgent offense?
What is he, like the third or fourth overall DB in points? So yeah, and he's at average points. You got to trot him out there if he's active, though. Especially considering you got Peppers is out and you got Julian Love in there to play and Xavier McKinney in there to play deeper. So yeah, Logan Ryan's all right. The other thing I'm interested in is the Miami pass rush because they're going to be playing, the Giants are, that is Mike Glennon. Mike Glennon is as statuesque as his media picture looks like on your fantasy football platform. He's going to get hit. Jalen Phillips is the big name, of course, because he had 3 sacks last week, but he only played half the time and is coming in banged up. So I don't hate playing him, but the guy they'd be more interested in playing is Emmanuel Ogba, who's been quietly having a good season. He had a good season last year after finally finding a home after being a bit of a journeyman. And this year, in the last 4 games, he has 22 quarterback pressures. And so he's not got 3 sacks like Phillips has, but he's doing what's necessary to get there. It's kind of the targets eventually translate to receptions principle.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, though, how the defense has turned that team around, right? They got off to a 1-7 start.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've had 4 straight wins, and that defense, right? I looked at what they're allowing points wise: 17 points in one game, and then 10 or less in the other 3.
Yeah, and that's what they were last year. It was puzzling to understand what had happened to them. They just played poorly for the first several games of the season. I can't put my finger on why. It's not like the personnel drastically changed, and Christian Wilkins is playing better this year after not being very impressive and earlier in his career, and Jalen Phillips is kind of contributing, and the only guy that really lost was Kyle Van Noy, and maybe that had an impact. I mean, kind of a locker room leader, but it seems odd. So,
what about is like Godshaw? Would he have been a loss for them?
Yeah, he went to the Patriots, and it's like almost like traded Godshaw for Adam Butler. But I thought Raekwon Davis coming in was the answer there, so I wasn't terribly worried about the loss of Godshaw. But it's a good point. That may have had an impact too.
All right. Well, 2 more 1 p.m. games to talk about. Philly is coming to my New York Jets. Now, the Eagle offense let Philly down last week against the Giants and now look to redeem themselves against the hapless Jets. Who are you looking to start in this game?
Philly to the Jets, man, that's another one where it's just yeesh. I guess the one thing I would say is Quincy Williams is you got to start CJ Mosley, of course, because he's going to get the tackles. The Eagles have been running the ball a lot lately. Quincy Williams has overtaken Jared Davis. And I will admit, come clean, I thought that Jared Davis would be an interesting pick to begin the season, and holy cow,
we all did.
Came out. So Quincy Williams, who was third round pick out of absolutely nowhere. ESPN had literally no highlight tape of him when he was drafted because it was such a flabbergasting pick. Here he is playing behind his brother in the Jets in New York, and he's piling up tackles when he gets the chance. The only question is he healthy? So if he is healthy, then he's a pretty solid start against the Eagles. I think the other problem the Jets have is both their D tackles, Sheldon Rankins and Quinnen Williams, both got hurt, and so I'm not sure right now as to what their status is. I don't know if the Jets are. So that's an issue for really the whole defense. This could be, if the Eagles weren't such a mess in their own right, this could be a real mess for the Jets.
It probably still will be. The last 1 p.m. game, Tampa is visiting Atlanta. Now, man, that Atlanta defense has been getting murdered this year. In their last matchup with Tampa, the Falcons gave up 48 points. Who are we firing up against Tampa this week?
Poor Falcons, man. You talk about this dearth of personnel out there, too. They used a second-round pick on a safety in Richie Grant that they don't, not even comfortable playing, and they just have end of roster type free agents that they added, like Eric Harris and Nuron Harmon and Steven Means and just rando dudes out there playing. It's just, I almost feel sorry for them. The big names, and of course, in this game are linebackers. All the linebackers are household names. Deion Jones. Well, I don't know if Foye Oluokun is a household name, but he's an LB1.
Only because people can't pronounce it.
People are figuring it out. The real challenge in this game is that both Deion Jones and Devin White are coming in banged up. Devin White's injury is a quad. Deion Jones' injury is a shoulder. Typically, shoulders are really difficult to play through for linebackers because you can't leave your head anymore. So I would be the Buccaneers are not a team that gives up a lot of points to linebackers. They don't throw a lot to Fournette. I would not be tempted to play Jones if I could help it. Like there are guys that that we might talk about for the 4 p.m. games that I would rather start. So I mean, you can't just sit Jones if you're starting 4 linebackers, but if you're starting 2 or 3, you got to find another option. I just would not be eager to get him out there at all. Now, what's interesting is on the defensive backfield, there's news today that broke that Antonio Brown has done something wrong with the COVID protocols, and both the NFL and the NFLPA have given him a nasty gram, and he's going to be suspended for 3 weeks. Well, one of his partners in crime for the Bucs was Mike Edwards. And then on top of that, Jordan Whitehead was put on the injuries list with I can't remember what injury, but he was put on the injury list just today. So there's a guy named Andrew Adams, and if people have been playing IDP for long enough and deep enough leagues, they might remember that name because every time Andrew Adams gets on the field, he produces. And if he's out there running alongside of Antoine Winfield, then both of them are pretty interesting plays trying to corral what's the guy's name? Kyle Pitts.
Yep.
And the Falcons have been giving up points in droves to safeties. So both of those guys are pretty interesting.
Andrew Adams. That's a nice deep, and he is on the waiver wire.
Oh, yeah. If he's not in your waiver wire, you're in a 32-teamer.
Yeah, 32-teamer with 70-man rosters. Yeah, it would have to be pretty deep. Now, Tripp, before we jump into the afternoon games, I like to test your seemingly encyclopedic. Is that the adjective version?
I don't print those anymore.
Knowledge of NFL players. Now, I want to challenge you with some sophomore IDP players. So, first question for you. There are 4 linebackers from the 2020 draft class to play over 600 snaps this season. Who are they?
Boy, man, the 2020 draft class. Yeah, kind of reach back into my memory banks and think about, Jordan Brooks is on that list.
Jordan Brooks is on that list.
Patrick Queen, and he cleared 600. He's got to be close.
He was 5th, not top 4.
Yeah. Kenneth Murray's hurt, so it ain't him. Jeez.
It's a tough list. I know. Yeah. And just so anybody watching understands, I do completely surprise Tripp with these, so he's not prepared at all.
Yeah.
All right, New York Giants.
The Tay Crowder. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Cardinals
Isaiah Simmons. That's an easy one. I should have got that one.
and Cincy.
Logan Wilson, another guy that I'm on this year. Yeah, so it's funny that that makes sense. A couple of those guys are early round picks too. It's just challenging the memory to reach back into what I was drafting.
100%. And considering the names we expected to come out of that class, those weren't necessarily
Murray and Queen were the top 2 guys. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Only second question. That's it. I'm not going to go too deep today on you. Looking at the sophomore edge rushers, only 3 have more than 450 snaps. Sophomore edge rushers, go.
Oh my gosh. Jason's not it. Young's hurt, so he's not it.
He is it. He
is even still okay.
He just hit it with 477.
Yeah.
So who do you think are the top 2?
The top 2 after Chase Young, man. Oh gosh.
Minnesota.
DJ Wanham?
He is number 1.
Wow.
Number 1. 553 snaps. I was shocked only because I was just reading a tweet from, I believe, Tom Kislingberry saying how terrible he's been this year.
Yeah. He's only out there because he's pressed into service. So.
And lastly, coming in second, Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, the Steelers. Oh, Alex Highsmith. Yeah, I was thinking you were throwing an outside linebacker in there, and that was what was challenging my brain because we're not used to drafting those guys high. So,
well, listen, if I'm not challenging you, I don't know what I'm doing here. I have to keep your mind working just to try to keep you humble.
There you go.
You know way too much about IDP for me not to challenge you. All right, let's go back to the matchups where you excel. Washington is visiting the Raiders. Now, Washington is currently giving up the most points to opposing defensive ends. So are we starting both Ngakoue and Crosby this week?
Well, if you got them, you roll them out there. I don't do it with a ton of confidence just because I feel like that the Washington football team has been playing a little bit better lately, you know. So you're looking at, I reckon you're looking at season-long stats there. And yeah, they were getting crushed there early on. The whole team is somehow stabilized coming out of their bye, which is a really fascinating thing. But yeah, you trot those guys out there if you got them. I mean, they have upside. The problem with the Raiders, of course, is that they just don't funnel tackles at all to their DNs. So it's if you're not getting sacks, you get next to nothing out of them, which sucks. So they're good, both quality DE2s that you trot out there with upside.
Anybody on the opposite side on the football team we're starting? I mean, Chase Young goes out. We were talking about this right before we went live. Mm-hmm. Chase Young goes out and the defense turns around.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying, causation equals correlation, but it's interesting that they lose their best player and now they play better.
Yeah. It's like it goes back, and everybody says every year the year is weird. I think it's possible it is this year. I hesitate to say that, but I really do think there's some weird things happening. Like, how did Buffalo get good at defense this year? They got pretty much the same guys, and suddenly they're all this better. And the Washington, I mean, they were again pretty much the same guys, but they added Jamin Davis, and they somehow got worse, and now they're stabilized now that their 2 marquee pass rushers are out. And they're starting guys that are sophomore, 7th-round picks that can't do anything. I mean, they're hardly functional NFL players, and somehow the defense is better. They did add William Jackson, which seemed like a good, strong addition for them, and maybe that's what's coming together. Maybe the secondary is coming together. So that leads us to the guy that's interesting to start there is Cameron Curl, because Landon Collins is banged up, may not go. Cameron Curl will play full time. He's not quite the box banger that Landon Collins is, but he's productive when he's on the field. And so he's a guy that I think makes a lot of sense to get out there in this one.
Now, to what used to be considered a marquee matchup and probably would have been bumped to the late Sunday night game, Baltimore at Pittsburgh. Both teams have kind of been disappointing this year. I mean, I know Baltimore still has a decent record, but nobody's over the moon about them. Who are we comfortable starting in this lineup?
Well, what I always say is that Baltimore's defense is finally starting to figure it out. I think they could be a scary team as if they do that. I mean, Patrick Queen was bad for a while there, and it not been quite as bad last couple of weeks. But But
that's certainly a ringing endorsement.
Yeah. I looked at this thinking, he could be covering Najee Harris, and should I play him? I looked at him like, nah. So I was looking at all the Steelers on this one because Baltimore plays a ton of snaps, and these guys are going to be busy. So I tried out both Schobert and Bush. Robert Spillane, who was eating into their snaps a little bit, got hurt. I don't know that he's going to play. So Schobert and Bush probably are playing close to full time because it's not like these guys are playing a ton of dime against the Baltimore Ravens. And then even Terrell Edmonds is interesting, the safety playing behind those two guys. And then finally, you got Alex Highsmith. And we talked about Highsmith a couple weeks ago. He's a stand-up outside linebacker who seems to be pretty involved in tackling. So even if he doesn't get a sack, he has a little bit of a floor for tackles. So and Lamar will eat the ball from time to time. He's trying to run and he can get caught tripped up behind the line. So I don't hate the idea at all of getting Highsmith out there. And obviously you play Watt and Hayward if you have them. They're just no-brainer starts.
Man, Hayward's been killing it for me this year. I'm so happy to have him in a couple leagues. So happy, especially in true position where I get him as a DT.
Yeah, what's the difference?
Very, very nice. Opposite of very, very nice, Jacksonville is visiting the Rams. Now, the Jags have lost 4 out of their last 5. The Rams are riding a 3-game losing streak. Now, although no team deserves to win this game, one of them almost definitely will. Is there anybody we're like thinking of starting? I mean, Aaron Donald, obviously, right? We have to start Aaron Donald.
Yeah. You start the guys you expect to start. And that's for the Rams. I mean, that's about it these days. Yeah, it was funny. I was looking at FPLC an hour ago, and I noticed that Sebastian Joseph Day was a top scoring defensive end of that because our league's a little tackle heavy. It's like, too bad he's not coming back. But anyway, so I'm really looking at the Jags there for my sits and my starts there. I'm putting a guy out there that I've liked for a couple of years that never seems to really deliver for me is Raeshawn Jenkins, but he's got to be busy in this game. Chasing Tyler Higbee, getting in the box, and because you expect this game will be a downhill flow, right? I mean, you expect he's going to have to help out Miles Jack. And then the other one that's interesting is Tyson Campbell, the rookie corner. This guy's 6'2". He had a couple of pass breakups last week. He's playing full time these days. And the Rams are going to keep him pretty busy throwing the football. He's got to try to track down Odell Beckham Jr. And Beckham had 10 targets last week. So he's a guy that's interesting to me if you need a streamer.
Now, going back to what we were talking about with Washington. Now, here's the team, the Rams. They tried to add pieces. It seemingly has not helped. It seems to actually have sent them in the opposite direction. Any insight from a veteran IDP analyst as to why adding Von Miller wouldn't help?
I think part of it is just getting acclimated. And I read something I absolutely did not expect to read in September. It said this defense really misses Justin Hollins. Like, really? I would never have expected to read that Justin Hollins was a big loss, but that's really been the case. You on the opposite edge there. Leonard Floyd's fine. I mean, he's not a great player, but he's been producing for the Rams because he's up there with Aaron Donald and all the attention that he commands, and the scheme is helpful. But they lost another edge presence when Justin Hollins went out. He's a functional outside linebacker. He can do a lot of things too, which was attractive. And since then, they've been trying to do with Obo Okoronkwo and second-year man named Terrell Lewis, who is raw with some upside, and so that's what Von Miller was brought into to backfill that spot. And I just think it takes time even though the scheme is similar, it's not the same scheme. It's not the same group of guys. And Von Miller isn't the same player he used to be either. So I think Darius Williams has missed some time. I think that's hurt them some. You got, I mentioned Sebastian Joseph Day, and I think we underestimate as IDP folk the impact that a good nose tackle has on a defense. And I would point back to Buffalo as an example of that. I think Star Lotulele's presence has made a huge difference in keeping linebackers clean and keeping the line of scrimmage under control. And it doesn't show up in the box score. And you're thinking, well, how can a 32-year-old who plays half the snaps have that much of an impact? But it does have an impact. It sets the tone. I'm a big believer in controlling the line of scrimmage to win games. And as a big Clemson fan, Clemson did that against South Carolina last week, and the results were 30-0, even though Clemson's offense isn't that good. It just makes an enormous difference. And so I think that's what's happened in LA on the defense. On the offense, I think their offensive line is they just don't pay enough attention to it for my taste. And then you got Matt Stafford out there, and there was a blurb on the Bird app about him having chronic back pain. It's like that's a known fact. He was fresh coming in, played great. He's getting banged up. That's not a shock, really, in my mind. So Robert Woods is a loss. You got Beckham again, like Von Miller, doesn't know the offense as well. Is going to make mistakes. Is going to run the wrong route. So I think that, putting pieces in there is easier in fantasy football than it is in real football. And if it worked well all the time and more people would do it, what the Rams are doing is not common.
Yeah, definitely not common. And it's not looking as though it's going to be successful. Last 4:00 game, San Francisco is visiting Seattle. Now, Dre Greenlaw came back last week and right away left with an injury. Should I be concerned? Am I interested in this news? Does it even matter?
I think it matters. Yeah, Dre Greenlaw is probably trending to out this week, and so it's like, well, that begs an interesting question: who actually plays linebacker for the Seahawks? And is that, for the 49ers? And but the second question is, does that matter given how poorly the Seahawks offense has played lately? So I'm sure Aziz Al Shire is rostered in most leagues, and he tried him back out there because Fred Warner's banged up too. I think there's a risk that both Warner and Greenlaw miss this game. And I saw a tweet from John Macri of Pro Football Focus, who's their IDP analyst, and he tweeted that Al Shire was playing ahead of Greenlaw last week, even though Greenlaw was back. Well, now we don't know if that's because they were easing Greenlaw back in or if they like Al Shire. But Al Shire, to me, is the answer for this game. And then the second guy is a guy named Demetrius Flanagan Fowles. Does he play full-time? I don't know. I wouldn't risk it with him.
You just made that name up. Come on, admit it. Finally. Let's cut off the bull. Tell everybody out there listening. You made that name up.
It's either him or Marcel Harris, the converted safety. So,
oh my word! I try to keep up. I'm in a lot of IDP leagues, and you still bust out names that I haven't heard. I haven't heard them. All right, 8:20 game Sunday night, Denver at Kansas City. The Broncos defense has been up and down all year. They travel to the Chiefs, who are hoping to continue their 4-game win streak. Who are we firing up in this matchup?
Well, the one guy that amazes me, I was doing my waiver wire article and saw I'll sneak one out the bag. And I mentioned Darren Browning. I recommended him a couple of weeks ago. And I was going through and looking for just candidates this week. And Darren Browning has played 100% of snaps in the last 2 games in which he's been healthy for the Broncos. And somehow he's rostered in like less than 20% of IDP leagues and on MFL. I don't get it. So, and if he's available in anybody's league, he should be picked up and started immediately. It's just kind of crazy. The Chiefs are play enough snaps and are doing enough.
Available in our FPLC league?
What's that?
He's not available in our.
No, that group is too sharp. The linebackers are too valuable in that league, man. 16 team format with tackle heavy. Yeah, he's been rostered for a long time in that one. I'd have put the rest of my freaking fob on him if he was still available in that league. I think I still have $150 left. I'd have put it all on him.
I know. There's one day we're going to do a podcast just about that league.
There you go.
That's a tough league. Tough league. Anybody else we're firing up in this?
No, I don't. The one guy I'm watching is Bradley Chubb. I'm not starting him. I'm sitting him because Mahomes isn't exactly back there batting the ball. But I am eager to see if Chubb can show something because he didn't show much last week. He's coming back after missing like a couple months. And he has a nice soft schedule coming up in the next couple of weeks. So if he can show something this week, he could be an interesting buy low acquisition for a couple. His playoff schedule is not so good, but the next couple of weeks are pretty attractive. If he can show something and play full time and maybe get a couple of pressures, I'd be real happy because he's a guy that I've liked for a long time. He's a guy that I'm holding out hope for.
All right, now before we finish off with the Monday night game. We're reaching the trade deadline in most of our leagues. So I figured I would ask you, is there anybody I should be going after in my IDP leagues that you would recommend?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of guys that are pretty interesting. I've been taking a look at some schedules, and what I've done is is kind of gotten a high price guy, middle price guy, and a low price guy for all the positions except cornerback, of course. And there's guys I'm always most interested in training for pass rushers that have a good schedule, because that to me is where you get a big impact. And so a defensive end, I got Nick Bosa down. He's got a nice soft schedule. Granted, he's super expensive and it's hard to pry out of there. My middle price guy is Josh Allen. He plays for Jacksonville, so people will think, well, he'll have bad game scripts. Yeah, maybe, but he's a good player. He gets some tackles. And the last guy is the cheap guy is Jason Pierre-Paul. He is playing through a torn labrum, so his numbers are not what they normally would be. But he has he's even playing the opposite end because they trying to protect his shoulder. But he's playing. He's a nice soft schedule. I think he's got Atlanta once, and so he's attractive to me. If people want to let him go for cheap, he's worth a stab. And I'm thinking sometimes when I do this, I have dynasty in my mind too, because I play a lot of dynasty. At defensive tackle, I was interesting to see that in FPLC, our fourth and fifth tackles on scoring were Christian Wilkins and Javon Hargrave. Both of the guys have nice soft schedules coming in. So there's a high-price guy and a mid-price guy. And a guy no one's probably ever heard of, for a few people anyways, Armin Watts. Armin Watts has taken over as the lead defensive tackle in Minnesota. And he was like a fourth-round pick 2 or 3 years ago. And all the time and money that the Vikings have spent on D tackles, whether it's Sheldon Richardson or Michael Pierce is a free agent, Dalvin Tomlin's a free agent, it's this guy, this Armin Watts that's emerged. And so he's probably pretty cheap. And he's the second half. I haven't thought about crunching the numbers on it, but I've got to imagine that he's at least a DT2, if not a DT1 the last half a dozen games.
Now, is there any worry with Michael Pierce coming back that Watts might?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, if there's a lot of bodies out there, he could lose snaps, but he's been playing well enough that I think it would be a mistake. I mean, the other thing too is that, what is their situation going forward, right? So are they going to continue to lose games? Or they want to stay in the playoff hunt? And what does that mean for trotting out veterans versus young guys to develop? And that's they're one of what half of the NFC is at 4 and 5 or 5 and 6 or whatever it is. So it's hard to say, but I mean, there's certainly that risk, but that's the thing. He should be dirt cheap, right? And he should be able to get a guy like Armin Watts for a bag of donuts and roll with it. So, how about you? You got any guys you're targeting?
Man, if I'm going to be honest here, I am the worst trader in fantasy football. I can't make trades. I'm terrible. I'm terrible at trading. And I'll tell you why. Because I buy all my own hype on players. And I don't believe anybody else's hype on theirs. So.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I don't know if you remember this, but about 2 or 3 years ago, you were shopping Kerryon Johnson. You were mailing in to begin the season because you just didn't feel like you had the horses. You were shopping Kerryon Johnson. This is a 16-team format. I had 3 late firsts over a 2-year span. 14, 15.
Wait, Tripp, that was you?
That was me. I dealt you 3 first-rounders for Kerryon Johnson. So,
well, that was a good trade. That was my best trade I've ever made.
There you go.
I've spoken about that trade on the Rider Dynasty podcast.
You're like that freaking moron. So that's why I stick to
I have said that. I was wrong, I guess. I have made one good trade. I take that back. You are correct.
Well, I never thought about doing anything with fantasy football until I started playing defense. I don't have anything much to offer on offense. I'm not any better than the average bear at offense. So.
Man, well, this is a bad year for our offense too. I mean, I know people are kind of hanging their hat on the 0 RB because all the top RBs are injured. But,
right. That's easy.
Everybody sucks this year. Like the first 2 rounds are terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, just a terrible season.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. But we'll see if we get any championships out of this. All right. Pass rushers. Anybody else? Any linebackers?
Linebackers. I find linebackers incredibly difficult to trade for. So I didn't put any great names in my linebacker target list. I got guys that you might be able to sneak away from someone. Like I got David Long. David Long is on bye this week. He's been hurt for a couple of weeks. So people haven't seen him. But when he's
Tennessee,
been out there,
right?
he's been productive. What's that?
Tennessee.
Tennessee Titan, David Long. Yeah.
And we talked about him earlier in the year because he was getting the snaps and putting up numbers.
Yeah. He took over for Jayon Brown like week 2 or 3, and now Brown's of course back. But I stands to reason in my mind that Long would come back and get the job back because Brown is a 1-year free agent. I mean, I would think they'd stick the younger player and keep going with him if he's already won the job once. And so they got a pretty attractive playoff schedule too. So you get them for cheap because people aren't paying attention or because people need a spot start now, or they're focused on getting in the playoffs. Maybe he's available. A couple other guys that I like there at linebacker, they're probably cheaper. TJ Edwards. It seems like whoever the Eagles trot out there is as a full-time player is going to be an LB1. They are just funneling tackles to their middle linebackers like crazy. And so he's a guy that isn't the middle linebacker price, but isn't a middle linebacker type name, but could be that kind of a producer for you down the stretch. With a couple, I think he's got a game against Dallas and a couple of games against Washington. So pretty interesting guy there for me. And
I think another game against the Giants.
There you go.
And Davion Taylor is injured. So
yeah. There's no guarantee that he comes back. If he does, actually might help Edwards because right now Edwards is out there with Alex Singleton. And Alex Singleton seems to be more of a target magnet than Davion Taylor was. So, but yeah, either way, I looked at some point in the middle of the year, I was looking at tackle efficiency, and there were 4 Eagles in the top 15 in the NFL. It's just highly unusual. So, and the last guy I got on there, some guy we mentioned a minute ago, is Aziz Al Shire. So, the risk there is that he loses the job and isn't playing in week 15 or week 16. But that's why he's cheap. Somebody will give him away for nothing. And you got possibly an LB1 or, the team's LB1 for the rest of the year if Warner and especially if Greenlaw don't come back. You got somebody you can use. I put guys at safety down. I got Derwin. Just a hat tip to Macri. Macri's like, Derwin's going to kill it. He's going to be the S1 again. Yep. That's what's happened. If you're paying up for safety, it's the only guy worth paying up for. The second guy, though, is interesting. FPLC scoring. The second leading scorer is Harrison Smith. I feel like that's a guy that we used to get excited about like 5 years ago, and we haven't been excited about for a long time. He's like 32 years old. The second leading scorer, and he's, I feel like that's kind of snuck up on people. So he might be available at a small fraction of the price that Derwin James is available. And so that's always attractive to me. I'm always interested in paying as little as possible at safety. And then the last guy is Jaron Curse. So that guy came out of nowhere. I mean, he wasn't even a full-time player to begin the season. And then Donovan Wilson wasn't healthy. And then they were trotting out DeMonte Kazee, and everybody thought, well, the Cowboys are kidding. They're not really going to play Keanu Neal linebacker. And then they did. So, and from all of this emerges Jaron Curse, who got cut by 2 teams last year.
And he looks really good for Dallas.
Yeah. It's just total night and day. It's funny how that happens. And that's the thing about IDP. Sometimes you get the right guy in the right spot, and it's more situationally dependent on, especially at safety or linebacker, than it is on the D line or on offense, and they just blossom. So he's like S10, I think, on the year in FPLC scoring. So yeah, attractive option there. That you again is another guy that people probably think they can, because you didn't expect to have him you probably picked him up in the waiver wire if you got him or a super deep league, and he's probably expendable. You probably have other options. If you're
now, before we talk about any trade targets at cornerback, question from Twitter. I need to win to hang on to my playoff spot this week. Is Taylor Rapp going to be okay, or do I cut him and grab Dean Marlowe?
Oh, I see. Well, he says he's going to be okay. He's not hurt, is he? I haven't. That may have escaped me.
Taylor Rapp. Let me just double check the practice reports. I don't see him on the injury report at all for safeties.
Yeah, I've not been a big Taylor. I know there are a lot of people in IDP that really like Taylor Rapp. I've never been. I'm not. In years past, I may have been, but this year I've not been high on Rapp. This is a team that plays more 2 high than 1 high, and so because of that, it's just the safeties are sitting back, and that's probably going to be the case again against Jacksonville. Because Jacksonville will probably fall behind, probably throw a lot. And so he's probably looking, and they don't even have a tight end as a threat. So expecting the safety to cover the tight end probably isn't real good. So I would not be excited about Rapp this week. But Dean Marlowe, I mean, pardon me for not knowing exactly who's hurt and who's not hurt, but I haven't seen anything about Will Harris or Tracy Walker being hurt. So those are your starters in Detroit. And so I don't think that Dean Marlowe is even a full-time player. And as a result, I'm not eager to trot him out there at all. I think you just kind of, I think we've mentioned 2 or 3 different safety options as sit-start options. And, we mentioned Andrew Adams. I'd rather pick up Andrew Adams and just leave Rapp on the bench if I had to. I don't know that you have to bench Rapp. I mean, probably still an option at some point. But I don't think Dean Marlowe's an answer.
Yes, and if he is, I don't want to know the question. Part 2 of that question. Well, I'll take this one. Do I cut Max Crosby for JFM? Crosby has been bad lately, and Franklin Myers has been bad lately. He had one good week last week. I'm a Jets fan. Don't try to pull this one on me.
Yeah, JFM's okay. Yeah,
I like JFM.
Yeah.
He started the year well, and then did nothing for weeks.
Yeah. Well, so it's so match dependent because they play Houston.
It is.
And so, I mean, you can't get excited about a guy that he's always playing uphill. So Max Crosby, I don't agree that he's been bad. He gets pressure on the quarterback, and I think the issue is, as we mentioned earlier in the show, is that the tackle floor is so low for the DNs in Las Vegas, and that's what's frustrating. If he doesn't get a sack, then he basically is giving you next to nothing. And that's frustrating to see week in and week out. But the thing is, he has 2-3 sack upside, which he's demonstrated a couple times this year. And so out of those 2 guys, and especially if you're in the playoffs and, if you're trying to win playoffs against good teams, you gotta hope that he gets home. Yeah, I think you got to trot him out there. So if JFM's available and you got room for on a roster and he's like your 3rd or 4th DN for depth, okay. But no, I continue to live or die by Crosby, to be honest with you, unless I'm in a pretty shallow league.
Yeah, I roster JFM in a bunch of my leagues only because I'm a Jets fan and I hold out hope. But I wouldn't cut Max Crosby for him. I'm sure there's somebody else in your roster who you can probably cut to make room for JFM if you need somebody.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion, however.
Probably a safety. If you're looking for room, I'm always look at your DBs. I have a lot of leagues where I only start the minimum. I only play the number I got to start.
Yes, I do that in a lot of leagues as well. If I have to start 2, the most I roster is 3.
Mm-hmm.
And just hope I don't get caught in injuries.
Yeah.
Did you have any cornerback trade targets?
No, I didn't. It's
because you can sign them off.
Yeah, right. Why would you give up anything for a cornerback? Unless it's never. Maybe I could see it. But other than that, he was the overall CB1, I think. Other than that, I don't trade for cornerback.
Never. All right.
Jackson, somebody like that. Okay. I mean, if I don't know what you would want to trade for him, I'm a guy who I would recommend you cut. I guess I have cut candidates I put on Twitter like every week. So yeah, if you can trade the guy that you should be cutting for a corner, then do that.
Man, I don't know if I could trade for a corner.
It's like a principle. I get it.
I don't know. It's like that would be harder for me to do than tipping under 20%. I always tip heavy. Yeah, I could not trade for a corner. All right, let's finish this up. New England Patriots Monday night are visiting the Buffalo Bills. We talked about them both earlier. Now, because it's Monday, Kyle Duggar has an outside shot of playing outside. But if you're waiting on him and then he doesn't go, is there anybody on either team who you could pick up and start to replace him?
I don't know if Adrian Phillips is on waiver wires, but he's the obvious answer in terms of who should start in place of Duggar. So I'd be playing Phillips anyway, to be honest. I like Phillips. And you risk that he doesn't play full time because sometimes he doesn't. But he's definitely out there against the Bills. But the 2 other guys, if this is not a safety required league, but a DB required league, then there's a couple of cornerbacks in there that you could look to. First one is J.C. Jackson. If you're in a cornerback required league, he's probably rostered because I think he's
Should be.
solid CB1.
Yeah.
If it's a DB league, a shallower DB league, he might be available, but he's a good start in this one. He's been tearing it up all year. He's been a good player. He's been productive for IDP. He's been playing a lot of that press man, which we talked about several weeks ago, being kind of what I like to see. I like to see a guy that's playing a lot of press man against, especially when you know they're going against the WR1, which is Diggs in this case. That's attractive. And if that doesn't pan out for you, then there's a guy named Jackson who plays corner on the other side of the ball that's worth picking up. His name's Dane Jackson. He's a second-year man that's stepping in for Trey White. Trey White popped an ACL last week, and Dane Jackson's the next man up. And you know what happens when you get some no-name guy like this, his first start, they're coming after him. So I've got him cranked up and in the lineup already.
Dane Jackson. All right, adding him to the list. Pretty sure that's not a real name.
Well, I got 2 zeros things. I got a 14-teamer and a 20-teamer. The 14-teamer requires 3 starting corners. That's going to be painful.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. All right, Tripp, we made it through all the teams. We did trade targets. We did 2 trivia questions, and we're under an hour.
Awesome.
I think that's a pretty good night.
Good stuff.
All right, so let's do some final thoughts. You can find Tripp at Dynasty Tripp on Twitter. His work is at dynastyfootballfactory.com. Tripp, any final thoughts for the listeners?
I'm just looking forward to seeing what my team's doing here in a minute. So how about them Cowboys? Let's get a win for a change. All these good teams on the skids lately. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's 10-7.
Oh, Jesus.
No, I lie. It's 13-7. 13. Wow, that's ugly. Little Jordan Humphreys scored, though.
Jordan. Oh, my goodness.
Little Jordan. That's my guy. That's my guy. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm at JJ Wenner. You can find me on Twitter at JJ Wenner. You can also follow me and my crew over at Rider Dynasty on Twitter. Thank you, Tripp, for joining us. Gary, we missed you. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. Now, you can catch all of our old episodes on Spotify, Apple, and wherever podcasts can be found. And make sure you tune in to the IDP First Take on Tuesday with Craig Reith and the crew. Now, remember, your path to the title starts with Gridiron Ratings. Have a good night.